All right, strap in, everybody. We're going deep into the world of campaigns, where even a seemingly nice compliment can be a strategic jab. Bill Clinton recently made a comment about Kari Lake that got people talking.
Oh, yeah. It's really a prime example of how image and political strategy, they just get all tangled up together. It wasn't even just what he said, it's how he said it.
Yeah, and what kind of reaction he might have wanted to get.
Exactly.
So, like, what exactly? That would give us the rundown.
Okay, so Clinton's at this rally, right? For Ruben Gallego, who's running for Senate in Arizona, and he's talking about Gallego's tough background, how he's overcome all these obstacles. Then he switches to Lake, says she's physically attractive.
Uh-oh, sounds like there's a but coming. There's always a but in politics.
You know it. So he goes on to say that Lake sees politics more as performance art.
So is he saying she's all style and no substance?
That's the implication. It happens all the time, especially if your opponent is popular or someone you see as a real threat. You acknowledge a strength, but it's superficial, you know? Makes people question if they're actually qualified for the serious stuff, like actually governing.
Oh, wow. So it's like praising them, but also kind of tearing them down at the same time?
Exactly.
And Lake, she's not going to just sit there and take it, is she?
Nope. She fires back with this joke about how she's too old for Clinton now, alluding to his past. Well, let's just say complications.
Ooh, snap. That's pretty clever.
Right. She turns a potential negative into something funny and relatable, maybe even made Clinton look a little immature.
Yeah, almost like political judo, using their own force against them. And this is all happening in Arizona, where the Senate race is super tight, could even affect the balance of power in the entire chamber.
Every single move matters in a race like that. Everyone's watching every word. And this whole thing shows how much personality matters these days. Sometimes it feels like personal stories matter more than what the candidates actually plan to do.
It's like all politics is personal now. It's tough to keep up with every little thing, though, right? All the back and forth, all the little jabs. How are voters supposed to figure out what really matters?
Well, it is tough. We are bombarded with information all the time. But, there are some tools out there that can help cut through all the noise and get down to the important stuff.
Oh, like what?
Have you ever heard of podcastworld.io?
Podcastworld.io.
Podcastworld.io.
It rings a bell, but remind me what it is again.
So it's this AI-powered search engine, but just for podcasts. Imagine you want to find specific topics, like what Kari Lake's actual policies are.
Okay, yeah.
It finds the exact parts of podcasts that talk about exactly that. You don't have to listen to hours of audio to find what you're looking for.
So I could ask it something like, what are the differences between Lake and Gallego's plans for immigration? And it'll find me the podcast clips where people are actually talking about that.
That's it, like having a researcher who listened to every political podcast ever.
That's pretty amazing, especially these days when everything gets spun out of control so easily. It could help people focus on the actual issues, stuff that will affect their lives.
That's the goal, right? To make informed choices, you need information you can trust.
Okay, so we've got this back and forth between Clinton and Lake. It's like a mini version of how personality can be more important than what someone actually wants to do if they're elected. And there's this new tool, podcastworld.io, that can help us sort through all the mess.
Right.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, I think you're going where I'm going with this. The media. They decide how we hear about this stuff, which parts get attention. It shapes how we see the candidates.
Exactly. And both Clinton and Lake, they both used the media in a smart way here. Clinton tried to, in his own way, make his opponent look bad, and Lake turned it around to connect with voters and maybe even made Clinton look bad.
They're both playing this game, and the media's part of it, whether they mean to be or not.
So it makes you think, what is the media supposed to be doing? Are they just reporting what happens, or are they encouraging this whole focus on personality instead of the real issues? That's a really important question.
It is.
We've got a lot more to talk about here, so let's dig into that more when we come back.
It makes you wonder how this whole Clinton-Lake thing would have gone down if we didn't have this 24/7 news cycle always churning things up.
Yeah, it's like they're always playing for the cameras, knowing any little thing they say could become a huge story.
That's the game now, and the media is right in the middle of it. They decide what we see, how we see it, and that affects how we think about the candidates.
It's tough, though, right? We want the media to keep people accountable, report on what's happening, but then we get all this focus on the drama instead of the important stuff.
Exactly. The way you tell a story matters as much as the story itself. It makes you think, did all this focus on Clinton's comment and Lake's response actually distract us from their policies? Did it turn a serious issue into just another entertaining little drama?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I get sucked into those dramas too. We all love a good fight, a witty comeback. That's just human nature.
Oh, of course, it's fun. But we can't forget the bigger picture, right? We need to dig deeper, understand the issues and how they affect us.
Totally. But how do we even do that? How do we get past all the noise and figure out what really matters?
Well, the first step is being aware of where you're getting your information from. Are you getting a variety of viewpoints, or are you stuck in an echo chamber where everyone agrees with you? It's important to hear different perspectives, even ones you don't like.
So we need to be more skeptical, ask ourselves, is this even true? What's the proof? Am I just believing this because it fits what I already think?
Exactly. We need to think critically and remember that even the news can have hidden biases.
It's a lot to keep track of, especially with so much information coming at us all the time.
That's why it's so important to be choosy about your sources. And that tool we were talking about earlier, podcastworld.io, that could really help. Instead of just scrolling through headlines or arguing on social media, you can listen to experts having real conversations about complex issues.
It's like choosing to learn about something rather than just getting swept up in whatever's trending.
Exactly. And think about this election. Wouldn't it be great to hear experts break down Lake and Gallegos' positions on healthcare or education, get past the sound bites and into the details of their plans?
Oh yeah, like a crash course in making informed choices.
This whole idea of using personal attacks to make your opponent look bad, that's nothing new. It's been happening forever. It just changes with the times and technology.
Oh really?
Oh.
I'd love to hear about some examples. It's always interesting to see how things happened in the past.
We'll take the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson against John Adams. They used to be friends, but it got nasty, with the attacks flying back and forth in the newspapers, which were the main source of news back then.
Yeah, wasn't Jefferson accused of being an atheist or something? And Adams was supposed to be a monarchist.
Yeah,
So even then, it wasn't about policy, it was about personal attacks.
a lot of the time, yeah. And as we got radio and TV, politicians had new ways to reach people, but also new ways to attack each other. And then the internet and social media came along, and, well, things got even more intense.
It's like the speed and the reach of these attacks just exploded. Makes it hard to even know what's true anymore.
That's why it's so important to understand the historical context, how these tactics keep showing up in different forms. We need to be smart about the information we consume and demand better from our politicians.
It's a challenge, but a crucial one if we want a healthy democracy. Okay, so we've talked about the media, historical context, thinking critically, but there's one more piece of this puzzle I want to look at, and it's the psychology of all this.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, why did these attacks work so well? Why did they affect voters more than hearing about a candidate's plan for taxes or something? Is it just that it's entertaining, or is there something more to it?
That is a great question. Psychologists and political scientists have been trying to figure that out for years. There's a lot to unpack there, so why don't we dive into that fascinating world after a quick break?
All right, let's get back into it. So we were talking about why those personal attacks in politics are so effective. Why do they seem to hit harder than, like, talking about a candidate's tax plan?
It all comes down to how our brains work. We love stories, and a good personal attack can be a very compelling story, especially if it plays on our existing biases and fears.
So it's not just the attack itself, it's how it fits into what we already believe.
Yeah, it's about how the attack is framed. When we hear something negative about a candidate's character, our brains start making judgments based on what we already think about things like honesty, trust, competence.
Like our brains are taking a shortcut, using what we think we know instead of actually analyzing the information.
Exactly. And that's why those attacks work so well, especially if they're about things that we care about deeply.
So it's not just for entertainment, it's actually exploiting how our brains work.
Right. It's about pushing those emotional buttons that influence our decisions. And here's another thing. Negative information tends to stick with us more than positive information. It's in our nature to pay more attention to threats and danger.
Like the saying, one bad apple spoils the bunch, one bad thing can overshadow a lot of good things.
Yeah, and in politics, that means even one personal attack, if it's done right, can completely change how people see a candidate.
So how can we as voters avoid falling for that?
Yeah.
How do we make sure we're making decisions based on facts and not just who's better at throwing punches?
Awareness is key. We need to know that we're all susceptible to these biases, that our brains are wired to believe stories, and those stories can be manipulated.
So admit that we're not as rational as we think we are.
Right, and always be a little skeptical. Ask yourself, is this really true? What's the evidence? Am I being tricked by a good story?
And what about fact-checking?
Oh, that's super important. Websites like PolitiFact and factcheck.org are great resources for separating truth from lies, seeing through the spin.
Like having your own research team to help you navigate all the misinformation out there.
Exactly. And remember, don't rely on just one source for news. Get information from different places, even sources you don't always agree with.
So being proactive, choosing what information we take in, and how we think about it.
Exactly. We need to control our own information intake, making sure it's balanced and healthy.
Maybe that's where podcastworld.io comes in.
Definitely. Especially if you want to dive deep into the issues and hear nuanced discussions, it's like having direct access to the experts who are really analyzing those topics.
Wow, we covered a lot today. We started with a political jab and ended up talking about psychology, media manipulation, and how to be informed citizens.
It just goes to show that even seemingly small events can reveal so much about ourselves and the world.
So as we wrap this up, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
Be an active participant in the political process. Don't just passively absorb information. Question everything, challenge your own assumptions, and listen to different perspectives.
And remember, our votes have real consequences, so let's base them on facts and policies, not just personalities and emotions.
Well said. It's been a great discussion.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll be back next time with another exploration into the world around us.